to Scotland and England. John Nichols. Good afternoon. We are calling to order our regularly scheduled meeting of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. And I'm joined my name is Elizabeth Glidden. I guess I should get that out of the way. And I am the chair of the committee, and I'm joined today by council members Quincy, Fry, Cano, and Johnson, and Andrew Johnson, excuse me. And we are a quorum of the committee. And we have two items on our agenda for today. The first is our federal, state, and local update, and Mr. Ranieri looks like is going to tee this off for us and introduce his team members.
Ms. Bergman is going to lead it off.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ranieri, and why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the committee, and we'll get going.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sasha Bergman with the City IGR Department. Thanks for having us here today to give you a brief update on the legislative session. As you may know, the legislature is currently in their Easter Passover recess. Their last official meetings were on Thursday last week, and they'll be resuming on Tuesday. So it gives everyone kind of a chance to see where we're at this session, what's happened so far, and where we're going. Some major bills that have already passed through the legislature and been signed by the governor include a tax cut bill, an anti-bullying bill, and the minimum wage, which you've maybe heard about. And are you using PowerPoint right now? Yes. Oh, great. And I just wanted to kind of tee up. Yes. In our media room that you're doing that. Thank you. Perfect. Mm-hmm. And so what we're planning to brief you on today is what's coming down the pike. There's kind of four major buckets of issues, I guess you could say. The first is the supplemental budget bill, which is kind of a big omnibus bill made up of funding for various issue areas. A second omnibus tax bill with some impacts to cities across the state, including Minneapolis, so we wanted to get you the information on that. And then the progress on the bonding bill, and then finally other policy items. We'll update you on medical marijuana, some public safety stuff, and some other issues. So, being that it's an even-numbered year, the legislature, it's not a budget year at the legislature. However, the February budget forecast yielded a $1.2 billion surplus. So that gives the legislature a little bit more money to work with this session. And already this session, some money has been passed into law, allocated already, including the tax cut bill I mentioned. Some money has been put into the budget reserve, and then some money for low-income home energy assistance. We'll get into the tax cut bill and the provisions in there a little bit later. So the supplemental budget bill is, as I said before, a big budget bill with lots of issue areas, HHS funding, education, and some others. And for the purposes of this slide, I just wanted to highlight the overall kind of picture we're looking at. The different net appropriations in each bill. The House and the Senate have both passed their version of this bill off of their respective floors, and it'll be going to a conference committee, and the House spends about $100 million more than the Senate at $319 million for the biennium, and the Senate's at $209. The conference committee was appointed, including Representative Wagenius from the Minneapolis delegation, and they'll be starting to negotiate kind of those big differences in both funding and policy in the bills once the session gets started again on Tuesday. I'm just going to cover briefly HHS, so we're going to go through some of the major provisions in the bill in the next few slides. So in the Health and Human Services area, the biggest appropriation, I believe, in each of the two bills is $80 million for this fiscal year for a 5% rate increase for home and community-based workers. So that kind of takes a big chunk of each of the House and Senate targets for this fiscal year. There's also a small appropriation that we're watching in each bill, Healthy Homes, which would be funding provided for education and training or implementation for Healthy Homes folks or practitioners to go in and see if, I'm on the right slide, to see if there's any asthma triggers that could be mitigated, or lead or radon or other issues, and that's something our health department could potentially qualify for in terms of grants, so we're watching that issue to see how that unfolds.
Madam Chair and council members, Melissa Lesh, also with the IGR department. I'm just going to provide a very brief highlight on the housing and economic development section of the omnibus supplemental budget bill. Not a whole lot of action this legislative session that would relate directly to the city of Minneapolis in housing and economic development. So I'm just going to highlight a few of the top line provisions. There's some language in the House bill that directs the state agency to provide continued efforts around reducing racial and ethnic disparities when it comes to home ownership rates. That's going to be in how they let their grants, how they vet applications, things of that nature. Just some rider language included there. It also requires Minnesota Housing to report annually to the legislature their progress in closing the racial disparity gap and the low-income concentrated housing disparities as well. So we'll continue to watch those reports as they are generated in future years, and that might influence some of our work here at the city. And then finally, the House bill provides a one-time appropriation from the Challenge Fund to be used for home ownership opportunities for families with disabled children who have recently faced eviction. And this hearing was really interesting. This was Representative Clark's bill, and it was really focusing on some of the residents of the city of Minneapolis from the Somali community who had recently faced some evictions because of disabilities and some challenges that some children had been having, and trying to find housing opportunities for them after being evicted because of kind of some of the challenges that those children were having. So kind of a pilot project, and we'll watch to see how that works. The economic development bill really is focused a lot on greater Minnesota. Their target was $39 million. And an overwhelming majority of that, $25 million, is going to the Border to Border program, which creates 7 regional initiatives, each of which is $1 million to expanding broadband access in basically rural, underserved communities throughout the state. So next year is really a year where we'll be watching more kind of programs and things of that nature that will be targeted specifically at the city, but just some real top lines for this year. And then I'll take it back to Ms. Bergman. Oh, Mr. Ranieri, excuse me.
Madam Chair and members, I'm Gene Ranieri, the IGR Director. I'm going to go over the environment section and then talk about the transportation section. Under the environment section, as you can recall, back I think a month or two ago, we adopted a policy to support additional funding for the SCORE program, which is the Select Committee on Recycling and Environment. As you're aware, SCORE is a funding source for recycling. Money passed through the counties to us. In this House bill, we were successful in getting a $7 million general fund increase, which is also a permanent increase of each of the base. Also, language of the bill, Representative Hornstein's bill, much of his bill is in the supplemental bill, except for the requirement that commercial property was also to recycle. That was taken off on a floor amendment in the House. Other goals in other parts of the bill are still in the House bill, but not in the Senate bill. The Senate bill does not include any policy language, and it only includes $750,000 from this special environmental fund for the program, and no additional general fund dollars. And I'll stop and try and answer any questions.
We do have a question from Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Ranieri, this 7.5 million would be a diversion from what's going in the general fund now to come back to the SCORE program. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Council President Johnson, that is correct. It would be an appropriation from the general fund of 7.5 annually to the SCORE fund, yes.
Okay. And so the Senate only put in 750,000.
But Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson, that's from the environmental fund. That's 750,000. There's no appropriation from the general fund by the Senate.
Okay.
And the request, of course, was for about 21 million.
Right.
Okay.
Another issue that the council worked on and approved was the pollinator issue. There were several bills. One bill would allow the cities to basically have restrictions on pesticides that are greater than state law. That bill was introduced in both bodies, Representative Davney in the House, Senator Dietzich in the Senate. It did not have a hearing. However, there were two other bills that were introduced and are moving. There's a bill dealing with labeling of plants and plant stock that would require for the plants to indicate if they have been treated with a insecticide that would be lethal to bees and pollinators. The main chemical here, the main ingredient, is neonicotinoids. That bill is moving, is on the floor of both the House and the Senate. It is authored by Senator Dietzich in the Senate and Representative Hansen in the House. The third bill is in the supplemental budget, and that bill is the pollinator compensation bill. So if there is a bee kill, there is a process to go through that the bee owner would have to go through and could be compensated by the state from the pesticide fund. That bill is in both supplemental bills, but their language is a little different, and that bill has been authored by Representative Hansen and Wagenius and Senator Dibble. And I'll stop for any questions on anything on that issue. Okay. Madam Chair.
Apologize. There's, I got two systems going here, and I probably should just tell folks I am using speaker management, so I'll watch that more carefully. Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious with in regards to the municipal authority for some sort of pesticide control. It didn't get a hearing. Is that expected to change at any point? Is that something that might be picked up next year? Is there not interest among legislators to tackle the issue? Any additional thoughts on that or information?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Andrew Johnson, it won't be heard this year. It could come back next year. There's lots of concern raised by the industry and how it would conflict with federal law and authorities. So there's more discussion to be. We introduced it fairly late, and we would have to go through a couple committees, not only ag, but also possibly environment.
And with the follow-up question, with the bills introduced, do you know, were those specifically for first-class cities?
It was specifically for cities of the first class. Yes, it was.
Great, thank you.
Supplemental budget and transportation. Now, the transportation issue is, you can see it in 4 different bills. There's the House bonding bill, which we'll go over. There's also the capital investment cash bill. That's House File 1068. There's a supplemental House budget bill. And the Senate did something a little different. They are basically creating a cash bill, but they're starting it with a transportation bill authored by Senator Dibble, Senate File 2859. They took all of their money for projects out of his finance bill and put it into the special bill. Other bill. It's possible this bill could grow with additional funds for cash for projects. I know it's confusing, but we'll try to maneuver through it. The House bonding bill, and again, these are just issues that impact a city or impact local governments. This is not the entire House bonding bill, but bridge replacement money, I think MnDOT asked for $75 million. The House bill has around $21.75 million. What's important is in here is there is an earmark, and that's for the Franklin Avenue Bridge, $11 million, but it has to be matched by, I think, another $20 million. So there is one earmark. The local road improvement fund is mostly unfortunately for rural Minnesota. We rarely get those kinds of funds because we have municipal state aid. And then Safe Routes to School is $1.5 million, and you'll notice in a couple other bills it's at different levels. The House Capital Investment Cash Fund bill has money for our 2 projects, for the I-35W storm sewers, and for transit development, $14.47 million. Now, the transit development money does not name projects, but it suggests that funding can be available for construction, pre-construction, design, acquisition for the I-35W Lake Street Transit Station and other transitway projects, and they name those transitway projects, but nothing is identified as a priority or a specific appropriation. In the House supplemental budget bill, there is funding for the city winter maintenance, which is really a code word for potholes. Transportation Economic Development, TED, that's a program where the Trade and Economic Development, Department of Economic Development and Employment in the state and transportation get together and will fund projects, have a grant process for projects that try to stimulate not only transportation but also economic development. I think we recently received the TED grant for the 7th Street exit off 94. Corridors of Commerce is a $10 million grant in the supplemental budget, and that'd be used for heavily traveled highways. We have seen some funding for the 694 project out of Corridors for Commerce in the past. The Senate Transportation Investment Bill is a $138.9 million cash bill, and the projects here identified could impact the city. Again, there's a Winter Street maintenance program of $3.5 million. Now, of that, at least 1.2 million must be used for potholes, and the remainder can be used by cities. We receive about 11% of that total. So if all 3.5 is appropriated, we'd be roughly close to about $360,000-$70,000 additional funds for the city. Of that, about 110 would have to be used for potholes, or it's Winter Street maintenance. Safe routes to school, as you can see, that's $6 million. Corridors of Commerce is at $30 million, and Transitway Development is at $14.5 million. And here, Transitway Development is very broad. The language basically says that the Metropolitan Council and the CTIP Board are to fund projects based on priorities established through the transportation planning process. And that, I'll stop there for the discussion. And also, I missed, I'm sorry, on the House Capital, in the supplemental budget, I forgot to mention that there is also some money for transitways, and that language is more specific. It talks about BRT and arterial bus. And I'll stop for any questions.
We do have a question from Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question, Mr. Ranieri, on the city winter street maintenance. Is that a new program? Is that a new funding stream?
A good question. It's Council President, Madam Chair, Councilmember Quincy. It is basically one-time funding, and it's general fund money put into the municipal state aid program. So it'll be distributed through the municipal state aid program, but it's one-time general fund dollars.
So when you figured your 11%, you're basing that on the MSA
Yes,
allocation?
I am. Yes.
Okay. And in all these cases, when there's a House version and a Senate version, this is what's going to the conference committee?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
And I'll turn it over to Ms. Bergman.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair and members. Next, I'm just going to briefly go over the first tax bill that was passed earlier this session, signed into law a couple weeks ago. It was basically a tax cut bill with three major areas of spending, essentially. First, in federal income tax conformity, the repeal of 3 business-to-business sales taxes that were enacted last year during the deficit. And then finally, the repeal of the gift tax, which was also first enacted last year, and an increase in the estate tax exemption level from $1 to $2 million, so making it a little bit more generous. Thanks. Now before us is a second omnibus tax bill that has been passed by both the House and the Senate. Different versions, of course, and it's currently in conference committee, which will start meeting maybe sometime next week or in coming weeks. Senators Dietzig and Davney from the Minneapolis delegation are serving on that conference committee. And the focus here of this slide is basically just to illustrate the differences in overall spending in each of the tax bills on the House and the Senate side. As you can see in the fiscal 14-15, which is the current biennium, they're very much in line. And in the out years, it's significantly more in the House. And so these differences and all the policies that I'm about to talk about will have to get rectified here in the coming weeks. Some of the similar provisions I'll just outline briefly as it relates to cities in the tax bills. Both tax bills is an extension of the 5-year TIF rule, basically providing additional flexibility for certain districts. And Minneapolis, I'm told by CPED staff, does have one district that would benefit from this. An extension of the levy certification date for the preliminary levy from September 15th to the 30th for cities and counties. And then both bills seek to clarify a local government sales tax exemption that was enacted last year for cities and counties. So it was great that that got passed, but there were a couple of issues that require some clarification. Both bills attempt to address it, but they do so in different ways, and I'll get into that a little bit in a moment. And then finally, a technical LGA fix, a problem with the formula from last year. So some of the major differences between the two tax bills as it relates to cities. The House bill provides an inflation adjustment for LGA moving into the future. So for the fiscal 2015, according to House Research, nonpartisan staff, that would create an additional $1.6 million for the city of Minneapolis. This House also provides direct property tax relief, one-time funding for homesteads, renters, and agricultural property. The House tax bill, not in its original form, but on the House floor, took an amendment that would repeal the Minneapolis Library Debt Service Aid, which is slated to start in 2016, I believe, in fiscal year 17. That's $3.7 million. That provision, again, is not in the Senate bill, and we stand committed to working our hardest to ensure that that doesn't come out of the conference committee report. Finally, the House bill also includes an exclusion of commercial industrial property value. Essentially what this is all commercial industrial properties in the entire state pay an additional tax to the statewide general levy. And what this does is excludes the first $150,000 in value from every commercial industrial property. And the net effect of that is shifting the burden onto higher valued properties. A run produced by the nonpartisan House research staff shows that properties valued at approximately $1.1 million or more would pay more, and then properties under that level would pay less, to varying degrees. The Senate bill, which has a couple of provisions that are not in the House bill that might be of interest. The first is a broader definition of local governments. This goes back to the clarification for sales tax I was talking about earlier. Both bills seek to address it, but the Senate bill provides a broader definition. And really the problem with the language that was passed last year is that the sales tax exemption was granted to cities and counties on their purchases, but it didn't encompass joint powers agreements, special taxing districts, instrumentalities of local governments, and that was kind of, I think, just an oversight. It wasn't intended, and so we've been working hard with other city and county groups to ensure that, we can try to get the best outcome there and make the definition more broad. And then finally, the Senate bill includes an incorporation of mixed-use properties into special service districts, which currently only commercial, industrial, and utility properties pay into fees for special service districts. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, turn it over to Ms. Lesh.
Madam Chair and council members, continuing with the bonding section of our presentation. In order to understand kind of where we're at in 2014 with the bonding bills, and I'll use that word plurally very generously because there are several of them, I think you need to understand what happened in 2013. At the end of the 2013 session, there was a handshake agreement between Republican and Democratic leadership that the entire bonding appropriation for the biennium would be limited to $1 billion. And in 2013, the legislature passed a very stripped-down, limited bonding bill of a total of $156 million, which just leaves on the table the remaining $844 million for this year of the biennium. With the surplus, however, that Ms. Bergman mentioned earlier, there's a lot of cash moving around. So the approach that both the House and Senate are taking, the Senate bill has not been released yet, but structurally we know that the approach they're taking is going to be to offer traditional geo-bonding bills. The House bill right now is at that $850 million level, but then supplement that with cash. So what we have now are two bills in the House, and we're expecting two bills then in the Senate to be rolled out next week. The Senate cash bill will be almost double what the House cash bill is because some of those transit projects that Mr. Ranieri was walking through are also going to be in the Senate, in the Senate version of their cash bill. So where we are right now, let me see here. So just a quick overview of the bills that have been released so far. The governor released his bonding bill, his bonding preferences, I should say, on January 15th. That was a total of $986 million, staying in that ballpark of that handshake agreement from last year, but definitely going over by a little bit. Included in that, as we know, was the $20 million for Nicollet Mall, the city's top priority, and our request again is for the $25 million. The House bill, there was an earlier version of a House bill that was quite a bit over its target, and we think, the purpose was really kind of to demonstrate really what the statewide need was in that first bonding bill that came out. So the second bonding bill that came out is really the one that we're talking about that we're going to be focusing on going forward. In that bill, the chair allocated $850 million in general obligation bonds. And then included in that were $4.5 million in planning funds for Nicollet Mall. In addition to that was, again, that cash, that appropriation bill of the $125 million. And the important thing to note about these two, procedurally, politically, and kind of how this moves forward, are the majorities that are needed to pass these two bills. And that's really driving which project is in which bill, things of that nature. You need that supermajority, that 60% to pass that GO bonding bill, and just the simple majority to pass the cash bill. So in that cash bill, we also have the $1.9 million for Pioneers and Soldiers Cemetery fence restoration, the city's number 3 priority, and $4.5 million for 35W North and South Storm Tunnel preservation. Again, the Senate bonding bill has not been released yet. We expect that to be coming out shortly after we return from break. The same approach with a GO bonding bill and a cash bill. With that, I'll pause and answer any bonding questions before we move forward. Right. Actually, the one other bonding thing I wanted to note was the real action around housing this year was in the bonding bill and in the appropriations bill. We're looking at $100 million being pumped in to public housing in the form of housing infrastructure bonds and rehab for public housing. So that's really where a lot of the attention has been focused, and that is currently in place in the House bill, and again, we'll see how the Senate bill turns out hopefully this week. Now we're just going to move on to talking about some other policy items of note that we've been following throughout the session. The expungement bill has seen a lot of action this year, and we've been working closely with Senator Champion as that's moved forward through the process. The bill really focuses on judicial authority to expand juvenile records. That was really a lot of the conversation was around the ramifications for juvenile records in terms of housing and employment and things of that nature, and increasing access to the process of expungement as well as the depth and breadth of what is expunged. That currently is on the House floor and has passed the House floor, and is awaiting Senate action. Also in the public safety realm, we have been working again with Senator Champion on the automatic license plate reader bill. This bill started off last year and hopefully will be resolved this session. Currently, the big difference between the House and Senate files on this issue is how long a law enforcement agency may retain license plate reader data that is not an active hit. So if the machine beeps, and that might be a scofflaw, it might be a stolen vehicle, those plates are not up for debate right now. What is really up for debate right now is if it doesn't beep, how long can a jurisdiction retain that record? So if a crime was connected to that plate in hindsight, how long then can that investigation have access to that data? Currently, the House bill is at 0 and the Senate bill is at 90 days. The House bill, both bills have passed, and we're now going to be awaiting conference committees, hopefully next week or the week after. A lot of the discussion, in addition to the number of days for retention, is going to involve who has access to the data, how long it's retained for in general, and issues of auditing and oversight and things of that nature. So I think if there's some agreement, some comfort language around kind of the policies regulating this, there might also be some comfort on the number of days that that data can be retained for. A lot of really exciting action this year on the domestic abuse front, and it hasn't received a ton of media coverage, so when you really sum it all up, it's much clearer to see how much has really been accomplished. A lot of these items are priorities for the city of Minneapolis and our partners in Hennepin County. The first one that is related to firearms is actually one that we have reached agreement on. There is good compromise on with the gun advocacy community to have domestic abuse restraining orders. Now, the current law is that a judge has the option to require that firearms be surrendered when there is a restraining order, a DANCO, other types of domestic abuse restraining orders of that nature. And with this, when there are certain conditions in place, if the person has made threats, things of that nature, then the presiding judge must require that those firearms be surrendered. Currently, it is at the judge's discretion. So if that person poses an imminent risk, now those weapons must be surrendered. One item that we have supported for quite a while that's very important to the Minneapolis Police Department is the issue having to do with domestic abuse by strangulation. Currently in statute, there's a list of items that are considered crimes of violence, and if someone is convicted of perpetrating a crime of violence, they are prohibited from possessing a firearm. What the legislation this year has done, it's on the House floor and in Senate Finance, is add fifth-degree assault, felony domestic assault, and felony assault by strangulation. That's the one that's really important for us to the list of crimes of violence, and will prohibit those offenders from possessing a firearm. As we know, domestic abuse by strangulation really is a predecessor of domestic homicides, so we're happy to see that moving forward. Third, we've seen an expanded time frame for warrantless or probable cause arrests. This is giving law enforcement just a little more time to make that probable cause arrest. The current time window is 24 hours, and when that occurs over a shift change or over a weekend, a lot of the time an offender will deliberately just stay away. They'll be gone for 24 hours, and that time window expires. So that legislation has passed the House floor and is currently sitting in Senate rules for not missing deadlines. So it'll probably be kicked to the floor shortly after that. And then finally, victim notification. Upon the victim's request, if the victim, and it has to be the perpetrator, if the perpetrator is released from custody, then upon the request of the victim will be notified of the offender's location, their city, and their zip code once they're released from DOC custody. One other.
And we do have a question from Councilmember Fry.
Yes.
Thank you, Vice President Glidden. And sorry, this is going back to a topic that you've already covered, which is Nicollet.
Yes.
Is it possible for the $25 million to come out of two different bills? So in other words, getting some from the supplemental, some from the general?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Fry, yes, that would be possible.
Okay.
Yep.
And I guess I'll just reiterate if there's anything at all that I or we can do to help push that along. Don't hesitate to let us know. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. We really appreciate the support, and we really appreciate all the council members who've been reaching out to members of the legislature and working with our partners in the business community. So we're hoping, we're getting there, but we really appreciate all the support we've had from council so far. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'll just mention to Councilmember Fry's point that certainly with the cash portion and these other kind of political framework issues on the bonding elements, not only is it a complicated path for City of Minneapolis on our priorities, but it's a complicated path for others as well. And so it's a big puzzle that is being put together with, of course, a lot of political implications, practical implications, and just also wanted to say an additional thank you to the business community for really continuing to step up, as they have always said that they would, to talk about what Nicollet Mall bonding means as kind of our main street for the regional business community. So, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One other public safety item that I did want to note that I know is of interest to some of our members that's not included in the PowerPoint presentation is around juvenile sexual exploitation and trafficking. The policy language was established a couple of years ago, and every year we're chipping away at setting up the funding mechanisms that are necessary to support the policy language. So just a quick update on the safe harbor legislation for this year. Currently, the Senate's a little bit more generous so far than the House. The House has $569,000 annually added to the base budget, which is a good accomplishment for shelter and housing, and another $569,000 for service grants. But the Senate is, again, a little bit more generous with $500,000 for shelter and housing, but then $1 million for the service grants. So we'll watch those as they move forward through the conference process. One really exciting piece of legislation that we are really thrilled to be able to work on this year, and we appreciate the council's support in enabling us to support this legislation this year, is the Women's Economic Security Act of 2014. This was an initiative that started with House leadership but spread very quickly through both chambers and through both caucuses, actually, as well. So significant piece of legislation. We had individual bills moving, and then we had each of those individual bills move together as a package as well. So right now, you'll see the significant list of items that are included in the current act as we have before us right now. We have a equal pay certificate of compliance, high wage, high demand, non-traditional job funds and apprenticeships, support for women entrepreneurs and small businesses, a report, and this is not enacted yet, but a report on the potential of creating a special type of retirement savings plan that would be directed towards women who maybe were not in the workforce for an entire career and missed out on opportunities to participate in IRAs and pensions and things of that nature. So that's going to be a report on the potential of creating one of those types of programs. Increased unpaid pregnancy and parenting leave up to 12 weeks, up from its current 6 weeks. Expanded sick leave to cover grandchildren. And also a really interesting new policy approach to expanding sick leave to cover victims of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and stalking who may need that sick time to recover from those situations. Increased accommodations for pregnancy and nursing mothers, protections for family caregivers, people who might need time off to serve as a family caregiver, and wage disclosure protections that protects employees from being able to talk about how much they're making in their work environment and not face any ramifications or penalties from an employer for having those conversations. That bill passed the House, I think, last week and is going to be on the Senate floor this coming Wednesday. So we'll keep you posted on that as well.
I'm going to actually ask a question here. Was the wage disclosure always in there, or did it kind of get added in as this federal discussion also was underway? It's interesting as part of the Women's Economic Security Act. So.
Madam Chair and council members, I'm happy to say that we went first. This was in the Minnesota package prior to the federal announcement, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Trailblazers.
Yes, we are, and proud of it. And then one piece of legislation I wanted to mention that we're also happy to see accomplished for this year. We've had great support and help from CPED staff in making sure that this language worked for the farmers markets in the city of Minneapolis. The legislation passed and has now been signed by the governor, so this is now codified in law. This created the first time that we've had a definition of farmers market in statute, but it is a very narrow definition, and it's just limited to food handling and food preparation regulations. So it's not kind of a blanket definition, but just limited for some licensing purposes for food demonstrations and food sampling at farmers markets. The one piece of this that was really important for our farmers markets was a regulatory piece that will allow seasonal temporary food stands to operate for more than 21 days a year in the same location. It was just something that should be handled at the local level, was really kind of micromanaging how and where food vendors could be, if they could be at a farmer's market or at a neighborhood festival, and how many days they could be there. So we've loosened up those restrictions and given the authority to the local government to make that decision. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Ranieri.
Madam Chair and members, as you're aware, also, we had some policy on cell phones, and there are two major bills going through the legislature. One basically has a technological approach to trying to prevent cell phone theft, and that is the kill switch legislation. And I know Councilmember Fry and Councilmember Johnson have been testifying on that bill, and also Representative Senator Dietrich's bill, which was trying to take cash away from resale of cell phones. The Senator Dietrich's bill about making it almost impossible to pay cash for resale is on the floor of the Senate, and it has been amended into the so-called kill switch bill. Both bills are on the floor. Both bills will be maybe have some action next week. Within the last 2 days, the industry has suggested that they have a voluntary approach where they would, after the 1st of July in 2015, have a process where there would be certain criteria, certain elements that had to be in cell phones made and sold, made for sale in the United States, and many of those would be security items to make it very difficult to resell and reuse a cell phone. I don't know what the authors of the bills will do, but I know the industry and the authors will be meeting within the next week to talk about that. And I will keep you posted on that too, because we had a fairly broad policy on cell phones. Pollinator labeling we talked about earlier. Pensions, you're aware that there will be an increase starting on the 1st of January 2015 of 1/4% for contributions by both the employer and the employee in the PERA general fund account. And then the other item I will cover is also omnibus liquor bill. That bill is on the House floor and Senate floor, and it includes many items of interest, I think, to the city and will impact the city. There is a bill, is language in the bill that would now allow other non-liquor conditions to be used in revocation of a license. That was inserted by the efforts of our staff, and particularly Ms. Lesh, in both the House and the Senate bills in committee. And then also there's the All-Star Game for any city in Hennepin County on the night before the All-Star Game and the night of the All-Star Game can extend liquor hours to 4 o'clock in the morning. It is not a local bill. It's not a special law. It's not just for cities in Hennepin County. Also, there's a small brewer growler sales can be on Sunday. There's also micro distillery cocktail room license, meaning that small micro distilleries can not only have samples but also serve their product in their building, but you can't buy it and take it out. And then there's some special law provisions dealing with the Museum of Art and also with the Swedish American Institute. Madam Chair, one item I'd like to add is the driver's license bill. I mean, we've been very supportive of and worked on. There is some discussion. The bill is now in the House Ways and Means Committee. We are working with the authors, and the authors are working with leadership to see if we can try and move that along.
Okay, Councilmember Cano had a comment on that, and I just want to say we probably want to, if we're getting towards the end here, we just have another major presentation. So, all right, thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, IGR staff, for working on the driver's license bill. We know it's deeply connected to a lot of the other public safety issues we're tackling as a city. And I know that NCR has been a support staff to you in this area, and just wanted to recognize Mariano Espinosa's work and the relationships that he brings being a DREAM Act organizer, immigrant rights organizer at the state level, in working with Worthington and other cities to help them bring them on board and raise awareness about this issue. So I'm hopeful that we as council members can figure out ways to really support that bill once Jean lets us know when it's time to start making calls, because it feels like we're close, maybe closer than last year at least. And it would be wonderful to see this as a policy change in light of the fact that federal immigration reform is still stalled, that we're probably not going to see any movement on that this year. And so many of our immigrant community members are still suffering because they're a part of, this broken immigration system that we're not able to move at the federal level. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Ms. Bergman.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this is the last update. Just the final two items. One, medical marijuana. I know there's been a lot of public discourse on this issue between the authors of the bills, the advocates, the governor, et cetera. In terms of where the bills actually stand, House File 1818, which Councilmember Andrew Johnson testified in committee on, has not moved in the House. However, last week, Senator Dibble's version of the bill was heard in the Health and Human Services Policy Committee. It was laid over, and it will be taken up again after the legislative break. And then on the minimum wage issue, as you know, as was mentioned before, Governor Dayton signed that into law, raising the wage to $9.50 by 2016 and indexing it to inflation. So unless there are any questions, that concludes our presentation.
I'm not sure if I'm not seeing any other comments, but I will just say the huge breadth of work that is happening in a bonding year. So in a lot of work that is happening around the bonding priorities. So thank you very much to the team that is working very hard in what seems like a very unusual year and unusual session with a lot of curveballs, and we're not done yet. So thank you for this very thorough update, and I know that everyone appreciated it very much. And so with that, I think what we do is receive and file this presentation. So I'll move to receive and file. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item is then approved. And we are ready to move on to our next presentation. I'm not sure who's our lead. It looks like, and I just
Madam Chair, council members, I'm Lauren Olson from the IGR department. There's a lot going on at the Capitol. It's also an important time for regional planning right now. As you know, the Met Council has responsibilities related to regional planning for the 7-county metro area, especially as related to transportation systems, water, and our regional park systems. Every 10 years, the Met Council is charged to develop a long-range vision with policy guidelines for, in fact, Thrive MSP 2040 is guidelines for the next 30 years. So we're at the beginning of that process where it's a 10-year process. And it's very significant because it has implications for many things to follow. Once this plan is approved, which is expected to happen at the end of May, it will soon be followed by more detailed policy plans, the transportation policy plan, water resources, regional parks, and also housing policy. And we will be very engaged in those discussions as well going forward. Those will quickly follow with greater detail on how these policies affect Minneapolis, our shared vision for the region. And then at that point, it will get even more detailed as far as the implications for the city. In addition to developing all these policies, which should be done by the end of 2014, we also get a system statement from the Met Council, which tells us how they believe these policies affect the city of Minneapolis specifically. And we have to adjust our own policies to be consistent with regional plans. And at that point, we will develop our own comprehensive plan to serve for the next 10 years. So we are at the beginning of a very important process, and we thought it was important that we gave this document a comprehensive review and got the right start to the beginning of all of these important steps. So in addition to CPED and the housing and long-range planning team and transportation, we also made sure that we went beyond that. Certainly we needed our water folks to look at this, so Public Works reviewed the document, Surface Water and Sewers. In addition to those departments, we also got input from sustainability, from the health department, from civil rights. So we would like to get started on the right foot as we begin this important process. And CPED has been kind enough to integrate all those comments so that we as a city can provide one comprehensive response. So I'll invite Chair Steve Munson, the Director of Long Range Planning, to give that presentation.
Forward.
Hey. Thank you, Madam Chair, council members, for your time and consideration. We are at the stage of preparing draft formal comments in response to Thrive MSP 2040, the regional plan, which Lauren just described how significant this is. It's a 10-year update, and once the plan is adopted and the regional systems are delivered to us, that triggers a 3-year timeline for us to complete the Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan. So we're here today to request council action directing staff to prepare the city's comments for Thrive. CPED has provided briefings and discussion sessions throughout the city enterprise and actively solicited comments from other departments, thanks to Lauren and IGR, to establish a framework for responding to the draft. So the comments are due to Met Council by April 28th. That's our deadline. Comments have been solicited from all city departments. We accepted comments until April 14th. CPED has engaged also in the Met Council listening sessions, conducted internal briefings and discussion sessions, and coordinated with outside partners on our response, most significantly including the Park Board, who will probably fold their comments in with ours. CPED will continue from this point forward to our deadline to work with city council members and the mayor to prepare that formal response and assemble all those comments together. Our response will include a cover letter, detailed comments, and an archive of all received comments. So the timeline, as Lauren discussed, it's not just about Thrive. Thrive is really the overarching policy document, but Again, we have 4 additional policy plans coming: the housing, transportation, regional parks, and water resources plans, all coming through 2014 into early 2015. We're also responding to the jobs, housing, and population projections. We're kind of on round 2 of that now, and I'll talk about that as a part of this presentation. We're expecting the system statements in the fall of 2015, and again, once we receive that, the clock is ticking on our own comprehensive plan update. So this is just a slide to give me the opportunity to say we will have more opportunities to discuss and comment on these specific policy themes. Again, Thrive is overview. We are making comments on the broad policy objectives, but there will be a lot more detail to come. So I'm going to start first with the projections, and then we'll move on to some of the policy themes. So in general, we have a positive situation with regard to demographics. We are growing. The region is growing. And so the issue before us is really how to manage that growth. But significantly, the region is also changing. In terms of race and ethnicity, you know, as you can see here, in 2010, 24% of our population were people of color in 2010, as opposed to 40% in 2040. We think that is a significant change and a notable change. We will become a much more diverse community. Population by age, similarly significant. By 2030, our senior population is going to double. And then, of course, by 2040, more than 1 in 5 residents will be 65 or older. So we think that's something that we need to think about in terms of planning for seniors and senior housing. 2/3 of this population growth is likely to be natural growth, so growing families, also more births than deaths, longer life expectancies, which also suggests we need to plan for families, specifically in our policies. So the way the region sees us is this, and you can kind of look at the legend on the right side of this map and see it goes all the way from agricultural designations and category all the way to urban center. And what's notable here is that the urban center category is no longer just Minneapolis and St. Paul. They've added a number of other cities to that category. We think that's significant in terms of how we're going to compete for resources. And it's significant in other ways too, that we'll touch on. So the regional forecast suggests a grow-in-place projection, which I guess we question. But as you can see here, and if you just look kind of at the top there under the 3 categories, population, households, and employment, each of those categories has numbers from 2000 to 2040. Down in the second block of numbers, there's a row called urban center share of region. In each of those 3 categories, you see that they're projecting a decline of share. So in other words, the regional forecast says the urban center, which by the way, even with the addition of several more cities to the category urban center, the region is losing, the urban center is losing share of regional population, of regional households, and of regional employment. So where is the highest rate of growth projected to happen? These maps represent kind of us pulling out only the highest share of these 3 categories. So you can see the highest share of regional population growth at almost 28% is projected to occur in the emerging suburban edge. The highest rate of regional job growth is projected to happen in suburban areas. And we look at us in the urban center, we're going to be seeing about 19.5% of regional population growth, as opposed to 27% going to the emerging suburban edge. We're going to be seeing 26% of regional job growth, as opposed to 29% going to suburban areas. We feel that this grow-in-place projection is inconsistent in a few ways. Number one, it's inconsistent with the spirit of the policies that are laid out in Thrive, which are actually very supportive of sustainability and compact development and focus on climate change and other issues that imply a land use pattern. Number two, we think that observable trends nationally and in Minneapolis speak to a different pattern, one that's more about a return to the city and different ideas about smart growth. And strategically, we feel it's in our own and the region's interest to guide growth differently. That projections shouldn't be sort of a projection of the status quo, but they should reflect a strategy. So zooming into the Minneapolis specific forecasts, it's the same story. You can see there Minneapolis share of the region. In 2010, in population, we had 14.49% of the population of the region. And by 2040, that drops to a little over 12%. And the same for households and the same for employment. We see a decline, same declining trend. So I will qualify that by saying if you look only at the sliver of growth, not the total region, but the actual growth between 2010 and 2040 and cut out the rest of it, then they have us actually doing quite well. They have us actually at the top of capturing that growth. But the regional projection and looking at all of the numbers, we continue to decline in our total share. And this matters because ultimately these allocations are tied to funding. So we want to get an appropriate allocation.
We do have a question from Councilmember Fry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vice President Glenn. I don't understand the difference that you just explained between the growth and then the actual population increases or percentage increases.
So the growth, for instance, in population, we're expected to add about between 8 and 900,000 new residents.
That's we, the city?
That's we, the region.
We, the region.
And so that would be the growth, but of course the total population of the region is over 3 million. So the share of that 800,000 would be the share of growth, but the share of the 3-something million would be the share of the region. So in other words, the share of growth only looks at the add.
So we're all growing. We're just growing by less.
Yeah, the whole region is growing, so that's what makes it a little weird because the whole region is growing. So it's really just the allocation of that growth to an already kind of decentralized situation.
I understand. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, yeah, and this is just to demonstrate. This is an example to kind of demonstrate the point. The projected share of growth for Minneapolis, Met Council projects that we're going to capture 9.83% of regional household growth between 2010 and 2040. The actual fact in the last 5 years is that we have issued 25% of the region's new dwelling unit permits over the past 5 years. So we think that we have the capacity and that it's in our interest to sort of challenge these projections. So moving on to the policy document, we have a lot of really shared values and good things to say about the policy document. The policy document is really based on 5 outcomes. They've adopted this idea of measurable outcomes to orient the planning. And the purpose of that is really to weave regional values together with their core policy authorities and activities. In other words, they don't want to do a series of siloed systems plans. They really want those things to be woven together and then combined, sort of regional systems with values, with local policies. And create more qualitative goals that can be measured. So the five outcomes are you see them there: stewardship, which is about managing resources, really managing finite resources, natural, infrastructural, and financial. Prosperity, in this area, they talk about fostering regional economic competitiveness. We think this is a terrific addition to how the region is thinking. The third is equity. So they really focus a lot on equity in terms of guiding funding and policy. It's about access for all residents to success, prosperity, and quality of life. Livability, they talk about creating and, importantly, renewing vibrant places and underlying infrastructure. And then sustainability. And sustainability captures a few different themes of the document, but in essence, it's about sustaining well-being and productivity over the long term. And productivity also meaning sort of economic productivity and the capacity to sustain that. So on top of those outcomes, they introduce these ideas of integration and accountability. Integration really focuses on this idea of efficiency for every dollar. They want to overlay those outcomes, multiple outcomes, regional systems, and local plans, and then kind of their resources are going to flow toward where you have the most stacked values, the most benefits that hit kind of more than one topic. So I think we'll compete well for funding if we understand that they're really looking for $1 to do much more on more than one outcome. They also introduce the idea of being data-driven, and under accountability, they talk about the development of metrics and indicators. So they really want to be able to measure success on these outcomes in a very data-driven way. This is also a value that the city of Minneapolis recently adopted, and I think we would be very keen to work on them, on these metrics and indicators with them. Notable new territory in the document. As I mentioned, this prosperity section talks about economic competitiveness. We think this is very important, very needed to have a regional view on economic strategy, and we'll get a little bit into that later in the document. Equity, they have done an assessment and they've created a map of racially concentrated areas of poverty, also areas of concentrated poverty. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And then under sustainability, they are addressing climate change, which we think is very significant. That has not been something addressed in the past, and we see this as a really positive step forward. Specifically focusing on equity for a moment, this is a big theme in the document, which we like. This is a value that we share with the region. They really focus on two areas in their equity commentary. One is about the RCAP and ACP areas to connect those residents to jobs and opportunity. And they
What is ACP?
Yes, that's the areas of concentrated poverty. There's not a
And what's
racial
RCAP?
component. That's the racially concentrated areas of poverty.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so they talk about transit dependency, and they talk about land use patterns, really being able to connect someone all the way from home to work. This comes in later when they talk about kind of the walking component of the mode share is also important. That it's not just about getting off of the bus, it's about having a sidewalk to get there and go the whole way. The second lens that they apply is about funding. So they guide their Livable Communities program dollars toward equity thresholds. They also suggest subsidizing market rate housing in RCAP and ACP areas so that they can begin to make mixed income neighborhoods and not concentrated poverty neighborhoods. And then they talk about exploring ideas about funding set-asides that are specifically geared toward this topic. There's no detail there, but just that this is something that they may dedicate specific funds for. So you can see there again, racially concentrated areas of poverty is one of 6 special features that are identified. These special features are basically maps. They're maps about these 6 themes: station areas on existing and planned transit ways, water supply considerations, job and activity centers, wastewater service areas, and ecological resources. And these 6 maps are intended to be overlays that are probably going to be dealt with in sort of a granular and custom way by each locale. You know, they cross boundaries and they are regional values. And so we're guided to address these 6 special features. Now to get into sort of the broader policy themes. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through everything that's on this slide. It's for your use, but I'm going to pull out a few broad themes. The housing policy guidance really focuses on affordability and choice, which is great. Thrive observes elsewhere in the document the surge of demand for multifamily housing and the trend of movement back to the central cities. But one thing we note is that in this housing policy, there's really no guidance related to those demographic trends. The demographic why. We think that there was a real opportunity to propose policies and programs that address, for instance, senior housing, that address housing inventory or neighborhoods for families. It doesn't really go there. It really focuses on affordable housing and equity. So that would be a question that we would have. Thrive's overarching value statements broadly support compact and sustainable development. But the housing section, again, does not propose ways to impact land use patterns that would reduce vehicle miles traveled or encourage housing proximate to employment. The only spatial lens that's really guided in housing is about transit station areas and affordable housing in transit station areas. That's a question that we have. Should we be thinking more strategically about guiding housing? And here and elsewhere, Thrive applies an equity lens to the Livable Communities Program dollars, but it does not define specific criteria for how applicants would pass that threshold. So we will be seeking additional information or requesting that they flesh that out a little bit just so that we can understand what those criteria are. What do they mean by equity and what merits, kind of getting over the threshold of equity in a Livable Communities grant application. Second big theme, transportation. This is a really solid area. Their goal is to create a multimodal, interconnected regional system. They really talk about all modes. They really think about movement from mode to mode in an integrated fashion. They talk about multiple modes within the right-of-way, and they, as I said earlier, focus attention on walking. So an interconnected public street system is part of the mode system. We think that's encouraging, and this section is really very consistent with our policies. One thing that I note here, you see in boldface the word streetcar. This is a sort of pulling out from the document the one place where streetcar is mentioned, and I'll get to that more on the next slide. But this is something that we're thinking of as well. We think there's an opportunity in the transportation policy to not only look at those systems that are envisioned for residents and workers, but to also more fully address the system of industrial and export mobility infrastructure. We think that could be more robust. And they do talk about studying industrial land and assets in the economic competitiveness section. We think that should go right along with looking at infrastructure and export mobility, and these issues should go together. So this is the special features map showing transportation. And you'll note that in the legend, they're not, as of yet, showing streetcar as a mode. Minneapolis has adopted modal preference of streetcar in a couple of areas, and we would like to see this appear in their policy document, that streetcar is indeed a mode that we plan for in the region. And then finally on transportation related to the airport. So under the prosperity section, the document defines the need to protect and preserve compatible land uses around regional assets like the airport. We just want to note that it does not discuss or identify that a balanced approach needs to be considered for adjoining uses where a conflict already exists. So we want to make that point. Regional parks. The regional parks section really focuses the parks around what you might expect, quality of life, protecting natural resources. We actually think that the parks should be contributing meaningfully to all 5 outcomes. Certainly, they are part of the integrated multimodal system. People use these trails to get from home to work or home to other destinations. We think they're certainly part of the sustainability and climate change piece. They would be a part of that urban tree canopy and that carbon capture strategy. So they're also a part of equity, and access to parks and open space is an equity issue. So we would like to see a more robust guidance for parks, and this is something, again, that we would share as a comment with the park board, who agrees. On water sustainability, I think that, the first thing we would say is an affirmation that we agree that water resource issues are key. It's a key stewardship issue. In our current situation, we're depleting groundwater, and we can't really project that into the future, knowing that we're going to have more people, not less. There's going to be more stress on that system, not less. So we very much support the region's interest in exploring best practices and really being a better steward of that water resource. And actually, Council President Johnson mentioned on this issue that we actually have excess capacity in Minneapolis that might already begin to diminish the need for well drilling outside of Minneapolis, and we might be able to contribute to that. And the second point is that wastewater infrastructure is something we have a substantial interest in, and we support Met Council moving away from expansion of that infrastructure and toward a maintenance of existing infrastructure. And importantly, the city sees a need for more clarity and action in this section around sewer availability charges and combined sewer overflow issues. And so we'll add detailed comments about those issues to the letter in the detailed comments section. On sustainability and resilience, again, I think the first thing is an affirmation. This is, it's great to see the region going in this direction. We think thinking regionally about these issues is really significant and important, and particularly making steps forward on climate change is important. The impact of strong public leadership on these issues can't be understated because we really have a huge impact when we start guiding land use patterns, commuting patterns, regional systems design. So that's something we want to support and participate in. And we appreciate the region's proposal that they convene regional conversation on these issues. From our sustainability office, we have heard the comment that Met Council could actually do more to use its authority to encourage use of renewables and enhanced energy conservation, particularly in aviation. MAC and its associated air travel contribute about 7% of Minneapolis' annual greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than from solid waste disposal and wastewater treatment combined. So we see some possibility there for more action. And the second piece I think that we would comment here is that we believe there's more we could do as a region to address food security and access to safe and healthy food. And Met Council has 2 programs related to agriculture conservation. One is at sort of the 10-acre threshold, and one I think is around 40 acres. But that really remains on rural land. We think there's a real possibility to do much more for urban and suburban areas on agriculture, and possibly to incentivize that or come up with new programs related to food production. And finally, the economic competitiveness section. Can't understate this either, that a regional economic view, now more than ever, is really, really significant and strategically important. It's now generally understood that national and international economy is primarily urban. It's an organized network of metropolitan economies. And I believe it was last year McKinsey published their study that said 60% of GDP resides in about 100 cities. And so, there's a lot of other metrics that look at this issue of, innovation lives in urban centers, that people are more and more living in urban centers or metro regions. So looking at our economy as a whole, not city by city, but as a whole, we think is really significant and important. On that front, they've proposed to study industrial assets and inventory regionally, and I'll repeat the comment I made about that previously, which is that they also need to look at that in the context of the industrial and export mobility infrastructure, and understand that as a system. We will make that comment. And the other, I think, really promising step they take here is they are going to be prioritizing development and redevelopment opportunities, project sites at the regional scale. And that'll be a useful new lens for cities, and certainly an area where we can collaborate with the region. So, I think looking at this larger picture for economy, all it's going to do is help us. It'll help cities to understand how we can contribute to economic competitiveness on a regional scale, which is kind of how the rest of markets in the world sees us. Next steps, we're seeking action from this committee, directing us to draft comments in response to the regional plan. We will then develop the submittal in partnership with the mayor, council members, city departments, and the park board. And the letter and detailed comments that we produce, as well as all of the compiled comments, will be submitted to the Met Council by April 28th. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really quickly, Ms. Munson, when we were talking about how we're challenging some of the conclusions, especially about the percentage of growth and the city's share of that, are we pushing back or challenging the numerator or the denominator in that fraction, in that ratio? Are we saying the projected growth in the city is not accurate, or are we saying the regional, or is it our proportion?
I think that the simplest way to say it is we think that the fact and sort of the demonstrable fact is that we're already getting more growth than is projected, and we have the capacity for growth. At ZNP this morning, Council President Johnson said, we have a lot of vacant land and vacant property in the city boundaries that is just waiting for a resident, and we've got a lot of capacity. So, and we have a lot of transit corridors that are guided for growth. So we know we can accommodate what they have projected, and we know we can accommodate more.
So you're saying their projections are understating Minneapolis' growth?
That would be our view.
Okay,
yeah.
Good. And kind of a complement to that question, is the source of the urban growth just another way of saying people are going to leave the city to the urban environment, or how is urban growth being projected?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Where are they getting their growth numbers for the urban communities of the region? Are they attracting new companies and residents to it, or are they draining it from the city of Minneapolis?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I can answer it at the scale of the city. I can answer it in terms of where they're projecting overall regional growth to come from. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it, actually most of it, is just natural birth and death stuff. About a third of it is in migration, coming from other places. But in terms of movement within the region, I'm not sure if I could answer that question.
That's fine. And then the kind of a third thought I had was, what other jurisdictions are involved in this kind of planning process and comments? Have the school districts in each of the metro areas or of the communities in the region been contacted? Are they planning for growth? Mm-hmm. How are they accommodating that?
That's a good question, and I'll defer if someone in the group has an answer. No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the school districts have been engaged. This is a public comment period for the plan, so they would certainly be eligible to engage, but I don't know.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's a big conversation to have, because as cities are planning growth and the region is planning growth, it would be really positive to have the school district saying, yeah, we agree with that, and we're planning for that growth too, and how to absorb that, or they cannot accommodate the growth, and then the growth won't
Right.
happen. It seems kind of backwards that the school districts aren't, especially because the growing population in both of the age groups over the 20 to 40 plan, 0 to 13 and 14 to 15 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Those two categories are certainly projected for growth. Those are school-age kids. So I hope
That's
we're
right.
accommodating that.
I'll make a note of that, and I'll find out the answer, but I think that could also be a useful comment to include. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. This is a very important report, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come to our committee. I know that we had a couple of members, so I just want to say that with a couple of members who left already had just had this presentation at their zoning and planning committee where they voted on this as well. And so this, I hope you just take that in stride that they thought it was a great presentation there and they were excited to be part of that. But our participation in the region is very important, this sets the stage, so to speak, for all these other reports that, as you said, are coming forward. So, again, really appreciate the attention to detail that I know many departments that aren't represented here today have provided input to this document and their thoughts as well. I agree with Councilmember Quincy. This kind of overlying question about the projections is really bothersome.
Yes.
I don't know exactly how to put it. So, my guess is that there are a lot of differences of opinion throughout the region on how the Met Council has constructed its growth projections. It is just interesting that the city of Minneapolis is saying that we can do more. I don't know that every city always says that. But not only are we saying that we can do more, I think we can really demonstrate how the projections may be. And also, I wonder, too, in looking at national trends, where, again, it just seems like looking at national trends as well, there just is more urban living that we are seeing. It's so I don't know how all these complicated projections are put together, but it's interesting to me that we seem to be replicating what in Minneapolis, what we are seeing around the country. We also seem to have a lot more positivity over a long trajectory of time in our growth trends, where we're not going negative, we're at least staying even and then continuing to grow. So I hope that we are able to work with the Met Council on what might be a more reasonable projection that fits the city of Minneapolis. So I will go ahead and move this recommendation, which is that the City Council will direct staff to provide comments that are consistent with the presentation that has been provided to us by the deadline of April 28th. And I do know that staff will be continuing to work with myself and Councilmember Bender, who chairs the Zoning and Planning Committee, on that final product. So I just want to say thank you for that as well. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, on approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, and that item is approved. And again, thank you, and thank you to the team that has put a lot of effort into this presentation and collecting the materials to make the comments. And I believe with that, we have concluded with our agenda for today. Yes, and so we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.